You think you know how civilizations rise and fall. You've seen empires crumble under the weight of war, famine, or greed. Yet scattered across the world's deserts, jungles, and mountains lie the ruins of cultures that didn't decline slowly. They simply vanished. No chroniclers left behind their stories. No survivors whispered their fates. Only empty streets, silent temples, and buried artifacts remain. What force can erase an entire civilization without a trace? And why does their disappearance still haunt our imagination centuries later? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on bell icons so you never miss history told like this. Archaeologists have long searched for answers, brushing dust from broken walls, deciphering inscriptions, and mapping cities swallowed by wilderness. Yet with every discovery, new questions emerge, and the mystery only deepens. For the story of ancient civilizations that suddenly vanished without trace is not a single story, but a collection of enigmas woven into the human past. Each case invites us into a labyrinth of possibilities: catastrophic natural disasters, shifts in climate, invasion by unknown powers, or self-destruction from within. But the truth never arrives neatly. Instead, it lingers in fragments, urging us to read between the stones. Consider the Maya. At their height, their cities blazed with color and ritual, pyramid temples towering above bustling plazas. They mastered astronomy, devised calendars of staggering precision, and carved histories into stone. Yet by the 9th century, their great centers in the southern lowlands, Tikal, Copan, Palenque, were abandoned. Forests reclaimed the avenues. Stone faces stared out from beneath choking vines. The people did not disappear entirely. Their descendants live on. But the heart of their civilization, its architecture and authority, seemed to collapse all at once. What happened? Was it prolonged drought that withered their crops? Or bloody conflict that drained their strength? The evidence suggests both, but the puzzle remains. The eerie silence of these cities challenges our assumptions. We expect civilizations to follow arcs: growth, maturity, decline. But some arcs break abruptly, leaving only sharp ends. This sharpness unsettles us, because it implies fragility. If such sophisticated cultures could vanish, so might we. The Maya are only one chapter in a much longer catalogue of disappearance. Across the Atlantic, the Indus Valley civilization thrived along the rivers of present-day Pakistan and India. As early as 2600 BCE, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro pulsed with life, their gridded streets lined with advanced drainage systems, their granaries brimming. Traders carried goods as far as Mesopotamia. Their standardized weights and measures suggest a society bound by order and shared understanding. And then, sometime after 1900 BCE, the cities dwindled. Kilns cooled, workshops emptied, inscriptions ceased. Flooding, drought, shifting rivers, each has been proposed. Yet there is no conclusive end. The script of their writing remains undeciphered, denying us their own account of their fate. It is as if they stepped out of history and into silence. Imagine standing in Mohenjo-Daro at dawn, the morning sun lighting the bricks that once held thousands of lives. The streets, though ruined, still hold shape, straight and purposeful. The Great Bath, lined with waterproof bricks, still hints at ritual cleansing, and yet no one walks these paths. The air itself feels charged with absence, as though time skipped and left the city untouched but uninhabited. That absence is what lingers most, the sense of a sudden departure that reason cannot fully explain. In the Mediterranean, the story deepens with the Minoans. On the island of Crete, they built palaces that dazzled with frescoes of dolphins and dancers, labyrinthine corridors winding into myth. They traded widely, their ships crisscrossing the Aegean. But around 1450 BCE, their palaces were destroyed. Some point to a cataclysmic eruption of Thera, Santorini, one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history. The explosion would have unleashed tsunamis, earthquakes, and ash that darkened skies. It is a convincing explanation, yet not complete. The eruption occurred earlier than the destruction of the palaces, so was it Mycenaean invaders who delivered the final blow? Or did environmental trauma weaken the Minoans so severely that conquest became inevitable? The mystery endures, shimmering between myth and evidence. What makes these vanishings so compelling is not just the archaeology, but the psychology. As humans, we crave closure. We need stories to have endings. Yet these civilizations defy that desire, offering only fragments. Their sudden silence pulls us in precisely because it resists completion. The mind cannot help but circle back, inventing, revising, wondering. And in that wondering, these civilizations remain alive in ways their conquerors never imagined. Let us turn to the lost city of Teotihuacan in central Mexico. Before the rise of the Aztecs, this metropolis dominated the valley. Its avenue of the dead stretched for miles, flanked by pyramids that rival even those of Egypt. At its peak, perhaps 200,000 people lived here, artisans, traders, priests. The city was planned with uncanny precision, aligned to cosmic cycles, but sometime around the 7th century, the city burned. Temples and palaces were deliberately destroyed. The population scattered. Who lit the fires? Were they rebels rising against elites, foreign enemies? Or was it something stranger, ritual destruction demanded by the city's own ideology? The Aztecs, centuries later, would stumble upon its ruins and assume it was the work of gods, not men. Walk those ruins today and you feel the scale of ambition, the hum of a vanished multitude. Yet what echoes most strongly is absence, a silence loud enough to question everything we think we know about permanence. This theme repeats globally. In the jungles of Cambodia, Angkor once gleamed with towers and reservoirs that caught the monsoon's rhythm. In the deserts of North America, the ancestral Puebloans raised cliff dwellings in canyons that still puzzle us with their sudden abandonment. In each case, a civilization with immense ingenuity ceased to function as a collective force. The people may have survived, moved, adapted, but the civilization itself vanished, its identity dissolved. And so we circle back to the haunting question: how can entire civilizations vanish without trace? Were they undone by forces of nature too vast to resist? Did internal fractures widen into collapse? Or might there be patterns still invisible to us, hidden in the gaps of history? What if the very act of vanishing is the secret? That civilizations, like living beings, do not always die predictably, but can disappear abruptly, leaving us to piece together shadows. Perhaps the greater mystery is not why they vanished, but why we are compelled to follow their trails into the dust, refusing to let them stay silent. The first chapter closes, but the search has only begun. The ruins we've glimpsed are only thresholds. Deeper within lie stories, stranger, darker, and more unsettling than we dare to expect. And one civilization, buried beneath centuries of speculation, holds a disappearance so absolute that even its memory feels like a ghost reaching across time. Civilizations are born of rivers. The Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Indus, all carved cradles of culture in their fertile valleys. Water meant life, and with it came agriculture, trade, temples, and power. Yet the same rivers that nurtured also betrayed. When currents shifted, when floods failed or grew violent, entire societies faced an invisible noose tightening. Among the most striking mysteries of ancient civilizations that suddenly vanished without trace, rivers often play the silent executioner. At the dawn of the Bronze Age, the Indus Valley civilization flourished along the mighty Saraswati and Indus rivers. Their cities were marvels of order, laid out with mathematical precision. Streets intersected at right angles, drainage ran underground, and vast storehouses suggested organized governance. Unlike many ancient cultures, they seemed curiously egalitarian. Few monuments to kings, little evidence of brutal hierarchy. And yet, after centuries of stability, their urban world withered. Archaeologists find houses abandoned mid-use, tools left behind, workshops unfinished. What happened? Theories abound, but one holds terrifying power. The rivers themselves betrayed them. Geological studies suggest the Saraswati dried as tectonic shifts redirected its waters. Without the steady flow, agriculture faltered. Crops shriveled. Famine loomed. Populations scattered into smaller villages. What remained was no longer a civilization, but fragments clinging to survival. For centuries afterward, poets of the Rig Veda would sing of the Saraswati, not as a living river, but as a lost one, sacred and gone. Imagine the psychological weight of that loss. An entire people watching their source of life turn to dust. The lesson repeated elsewhere. In Mesopotamia, the world's earliest cities rose between the Tigris and Euphrates. Sumerian scribes etched records of floods that swept away whole towns. Too little water meant famine, too much spelled ruin. The delicate balance demanded reverence, and gods of water loomed large in their mythology. But sometimes reverence wasn't enough. Around 2200 BCE, a sudden climate shift brought drought across the region. Crops failed, trade routes collapsed, empires weakened. Akkad, the empire forged by Sargon's conquests, dissolved. Settlements dwindled, and nomads surged across the weakened land. Here was no slow decline, but a sudden unraveling fueled by something as simple and devastating as the absence of rain. Further west, in the fertile Nile Valley, Egypt endured for millennia precisely because of the river's predictability. The annual inundation was as close to certainty as nature provided. Yet even Egypt was not immune. Records from the first intermediate period describe years of chaos when the Nile's floods failed, turning prosperity into starvation. Temples fell silent, pharaohs lost authority, and rival factions tore at the land. Though Egypt revived, the scars lingered. Civilizations live and die by water, and when water falters, so do they. But rivers tell only part of the story. Beyond their banks, other civilizations fell victim to forces both natural and human. The ancestral Puebloans of the American Southwest built astonishing cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. These stone complexes clung to canyon walls, reached by ladders and hidden from enemies. For centuries, they flourished, orchestrating trade networks that spanned deserts and mountains. Then, by the late 13th century, their great houses were abandoned. Scholars point to a 50-year drought that withered maize crops. Without water, survival meant migration. Communities fractured, leaving behind stone cities perched like fossils in the cliffs. Standing in those ruins today, the silence feels heavier than stone. Rivers and rains shaped destiny, but they also shaped myth. For the Maya, prolonged drought appears again as a factor in their 9th century collapse. Scientific studies of lake sediments confirm cycles of drought, aligning with the abandonment of cities. Imagine priests standing atop pyramids, imploring the gods as skies remained barren. The people waited for rain, but none came. Political order fractured, wars multiplied, famine spread. A civilization defined by its mastery of cycles. The calendar, the stars, was undone by the one cycle it could not control. The story grows stranger with the mysterious city of Ubar, sometimes called the Atlantis of the Sands. Ancient Arab texts speak of Iram of the Pillars, a wealthy trading hub in the desert, said to have defied God and been swallowed by sand. For centuries, its existence was dismissed as legend. Then satellite imagery in the 1990s revealed ancient caravan routes leading to a buried settlement in Oman. Archaeologists uncovered ruins that had once been a center for the frankincense trade. And yet, at some point in antiquity, the city collapsed. Theories suggest the limestone caves beneath it gave way, swallowing parts of the settlement. Others argue shifting sands and declining trade routes doomed it. Whatever the case, Ubar vanished so thoroughly it lived only in myth until rediscovered. Here, the betrayal was not by rivers but by desert itself, a reminder that nature's erasure can be as complete as fire. Water, whether too much or too little, may explain many disappearances, but it never explains them fully. The collapse of Angkor in Cambodia illustrates this vividly. Angkor was a hydraulic marvel, its reservoirs and canals feeding a city of nearly 1 million people in the 12th century. Yet by the 15th century it lay abandoned. Climate records suggest alternating cycles of drought and monsoon overwhelmed the water system. Canals clogged, reservoirs failed. Once the system broke, the city starved. Combined with foreign invasions, the result was abandonment. The jungle surged back, roots cracking stone, swallowing towers until only monks and wanderers whispered of its former glory. But sometimes the vanishing isn't about nature at all. It is about power, ambition, and violence. Teotihuacan's burning, as described earlier, shows human hands at work. Civil war or revolution may leave cities hollow overnight. Here, rivers are innocent. People are guilty, yet even human causes weave with natural ones. Drought fuels conflict. Scarcity breeds revolt. The interplay of water and will is complex, and it is in this complexity that civilizations either endure or disappear. What makes these disappearances unsettling is not simply their cause, but their suddenness. A river shifts course, and an entire way of life vanishes. A drought lingers, and temples fall silent. For those who lived it, the collapse must have felt like divine abandonment. For us, it feels like staring into a mirror, wondering whether the forces that unmade them could one day unmake us. And perhaps they already have, in ways we fail to see. Our own dependence on water is no less absolute. Dams and aquifers disguise scarcity, but climate patterns shift still. What if our story, too, is not of slow decline, but of sudden disappearance, leaving behind only fragments for future archaeologists to puzzle over? The rivers of the past whisper a warning. Their currents run through our history, their betrayals etched into ruins. But the warning grows sharper when we move beyond rivers and ask, what if the forces that erased entire civilizations were not entirely natural? What if something more elusive, more deliberate, has stalked human societies since the dawn of time? Civilizations do not always vanish because the earth betrays them. Sometimes the enemy comes not from sky or soil, but from beyond the horizon. Blades glinting, sails rising, or hooves thundering. Human ambition has often been the most ruthless force of erasure. Among the mysteries of ancient civilizations that suddenly vanished without trace, invasion remains one of the most unsettling, because it exposes not only fragility, but also the violence encoded in history's DNA. The story of the Minoans lingers here. Their palatial centers, such as Knossos, seemed like labyrinths of ritual and power. After centuries of dominance in the Aegean, destruction struck around 1450 BCE. Palaces fell, fires consumed archives, frescoes blackened. Scholars once believed the eruption of Thera sealed their doom, but radiocarbon dating suggested the volcano erupted earlier. This gap invites another explanation: invasion. The Mycenaeans, rising power on the Greek mainland, may have crossed the sea to seize the weakened island. Within decades, Minoan symbols gave way to Mycenaean ones. Was this conquest swift and brutal, or gradual assimilation cloaked in fire? The silence of the Minoan script, Linear A, leaves the question unanswered. What we know is that the culture that gave birth to the myth of the Minotaur and inspired legends of Atlantis disappeared beneath another's shadow. The Hittites tell a similar story. At their height, around 1200 BCE, their empire stretched across Anatolia into Syria, rivaling Egypt itself. They mastered chariots and diplomacy, leaving behind clay tablets that spoke of treaties and wars. Yet suddenly their cities were abandoned, their palaces burned, their capital Hattusa deserted. The culprits remain mysterious. Some blame the enigmatic sea peoples, marauders who appeared across the Mediterranean, toppling empires in a storm of raids. Others argue internal strife and famine primed the Hittites for collapse. Whatever the case, their empire dissolved so thoroughly that for centuries, even their name was forgotten, remembered only through the Bible until rediscovery in the 20th century. Imagine that erasure, an entire superpower wiped from memory, as though history itself conspired in the invasion. The sea peoples themselves embody the terror of disappearance. Who were they? The Egyptians recorded desperate battles against them during the reign of Ramses III, describing fleets and warriors storming the delta. But their origins remain debated. Displaced Mycenaeans, pirates, climate refugees? Their assaults devastated city after city, from Ugarit to Cyprus, leaving smoking ruins. Ugarit's last letters, found baked into clay by the fire that destroyed them, plead for aid. The enemy ships are here. Our city is burning. Help never arrived. The city was erased in days. To stand among Ugarit's ruins now is to feel the urgency frozen in clay, the final breath of a civilization smothered by invasion. And yet, invasion is not always conquest. It can be disappearance. Consider the case of Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis. By 1050 CE, it was the largest city north of Mexico, home to tens of thousands. Massive earthen mounds rose from the plains, plazas spread wide, trade stretched across the continent. Then, by the 14th century, Cahokia was abandoned. Some scholars suggest climate change and resource strain, but others see signs of conflict, fortifications hastily built, evidence of social unrest. Perhaps war fractured them from within, or neighbors pressed from without. What remains is a riddle, an urban society that bloomed and vanished in less than 4 centuries, leaving behind only earthworks and silence. Sometimes disappearance comes in waves of migration. The collapse of Mycenaean Greece around 1200 BCE ushered in the so-called Dark Ages. Palaces crumbled, writing vanished, population shrank. Was it invasion from Dorians or others sweeping south? Or internal conflict amplified by famine and fire? We find only abandoned citadels and scattered graves. Yet out of this silence eventually rose classical Greece, as if the disappearance was not an end but a cocoon. Invasions may erase, but they also transform, though rarely without leaving trauma behind. Psychologically, invasion terrifies because it is personal. Floods and droughts may be cruel, but they are indifferent. Invasion, however, carries intent. It is one group's will imposed on another's survival. For those who witnessed it, the terror was not abstract but immediate. The sight of flames devouring familiar walls, the sound of foreign tongues barking commands, the taste of ash in the air. To vanish under such circumstances is to be not only defeated, but obliterated, denied even the dignity of remembrance. And yet, not all invasions leave clear traces. Some civilizations vanish without any obvious conqueror. The Olmec civilization of Mesoamerica thrived between 1500 and 400 BCE, carving colossal stone heads and shaping early Mesoamerican culture. Then their centers were abandoned. Was it environmental collapse, internal strife, Or invaders whose names are lost. Without written records, the cause dissolves into ambiguity. To look at an Olmec head today, its monumental face staring impassively, is to confront a silence that feels deliberate, as though the civilization chose to vanish rather than be remembered by conquerors. We find the same eerie absence in the case of the Etruscans of Italy. Before Rome's rise, they dominated central Italy with cities rich in art, trade, and ritual. By the time Rome absorbed them, their language was already fading, their identity dissolving. Rome claimed their gods, their engineering, their customs, until the Etruscans became shadows within another's glory. Was this slow assimilation or deliberate erasure? When a civilization disappears not by sudden destruction, but by being devoured piecemeal, does it count as vanishing without trace? Perhaps the trace lies in the conqueror, but the conquered identity is gone, ungraspable. The theme continues with Carthage. Though not sudden in the same way as Ugarit, its annihilation by Rome in 146 BCE was so complete that Roman writers claimed they sowed salt in its fields so nothing would grow. Whether literal or symbolic, the image endures, a civilization erased not just physically but ritually, as if to scrub its very memory. What does it mean for human ambition to destroy so totally that memory itself is considered a threat? In such cases, disappearance is not mystery but warning. But sometimes, the conqueror is invisible. Consider the Toltecs of central Mexico. Before the rise of the Aztecs, they built Tula with grand halls supported by towering warrior statues. Then, sometime around the 12th century, Tula was abandoned. Some suggest nomadic invasions, others internal strife. By the time the Aztecs looked back, they revered the Toltecs as mythical forebears, attributing to them supernatural wisdom. The real civilization had vanished, leaving only legend in its place. This transformation from history to myth may be the strangest form of invasion, not by armies, but by memory itself, which reshapes the past into something unrecognizable. What unites these tales is their abruptness. Civilizations, whether great or small, can be extinguished almost overnight by hostile forces. Cities that took centuries to build can be burned in days. What makes the disappearances endure in imagination is not only the violence, but the silence that follows. When invaders win, they often write the history. When the conquered vanish, their story is silenced. We are left to reconstruct from ruins, knowing that much of what mattered most to them, their voices, their fears, their final hours, can never be recovered. And yet, beneath the ash and rubble, beneath the clay tablets and broken walls, something whispers. It whispers of resilience, of fragments carried into other cultures, of ideas that outlived the civilizations that birthed them. Invasions may erase, but traces linger in ways we do not always recognize. The question is, what if the greatest disappearance was not caused by water, famine, or war, but by something deeper, something that stalks human societies from within? We have followed rivers that dried, skies that withheld rain, and armies that struck like thunder. Yet some mysteries refuse even these explanations. In every corner of the world there are stories of civilizations that did not merely collapse, but seem to dissolve into myth. It is here, in the borderland between history and legend, that the most haunting vanishings reside. These are the ancient civilizations that suddenly vanished without trace, and whose absence leaves us wondering if truth itself is incomplete. Take the case of the Nabataeans, builders of Petra. Their rose-red city, carved into cliffs, dazzles with rock-cut temples and intricate channels that guided desert rains. For centuries, Petra thrived as a trade hub, linking Arabia with the Mediterranean. Then by the 7th century, it was largely abandoned. Earthquakes damaged it, shifting trade routes drained it, yet the speed and completeness of its decline remain puzzling. Desert winds buried the city until rediscovery in the 19th century. To wander Petra's sick, the narrow gorge leading to its treasury, is to feel the strangeness of walking into a city that should not exist. Grand yet silent, familiar yet forgotten. Why would a people who mastered desert survival simply fade away? Further east, the Sogdians of Central Asia once thrived along the Silk Road. Merchants, linguists, and cultural bridges, they linked China, Persia, and India. Their cities buzzed with cosmopolitan energy. Yet by the 10th century, their world unraveled. Islamic conquest absorbed them, new powers diverted trade, and their language withered. Like the Etruscans, their disappearance came not through fire alone, but through assimilation so complete that the civilizations ceased to exist as an identity. Here the vanishing was psychological. What does it mean when a people's memory no longer calls itself by the same name? Other mysteries resist even this clarity. In South America, the Nazca people etched lines across the desert. Colossal geoglyphs forming hummingbirds, spiders, and monkeys, visible only from the sky. Their society flourished for centuries, with intricate irrigation sustaining life in an arid land. Then around 600 CE, they disappeared. Archaeological evidence points to deforestation that destabilized their environment, leaving them vulnerable to floods and famine. Yet the Nazca's great lines endure, unbroken across centuries, as if mocking the notion of disappearance. The people are gone, but their marks remain, vast enough to defy oblivion. Was this their intention? To leave something permanent, even as they knew collapse was near? Legends of lost civilizations blur into this theme. Atlantis, though born of Plato's allegory, has captivated imaginations for millennia. Did it represent memory of the Minoans shattered by volcanic eruption? Or was it a moral tale of hubris and divine retribution? The absence of proof has not silenced the allure. Instead, Atlantis embodies the universal fear that entire civilizations can vanish into the sea, leaving nothing but whispers. Whether real or metaphorical, its power lies in its silence. Consider also the people of Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Their giant moai statues stand as sentinels, their faces solemn, their backs turned to the sea. For centuries, the islanders carved and raised these monoliths, feats requiring immense labor and coordination. Then, by the time Europeans arrived in the 18th century, the society had fragmented. Theories once accused them of ecocide, exhausting resources until collapse. Recent research suggests something more complex: disease brought by outsiders, enslavement, and conflict layered onto environmental strain. Yet the image of a society toppling its own statues, its culture unraveling in isolation, endures as one of history's most unsettling vanishings. And then there is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the world's oldest known temple complex, dating back 11,000 years. Massive stone pillars carved with animals rise from the earth, evidence of organized religion before agriculture. Yet after centuries of use, the site was deliberately buried. Why? Was it abandonment or a ritual sealing, as though its builders sought to hide their civilization from future eyes? No one knows who they were or why they disappeared. Their traces linger in stones but not in names. To confront Göbekli Tepe is to confront the deepest silence of all, the silence of civilizations too ancient to remember themselves. Why do these stories unsettle us? Because they blur the line between myth and history, forcing us to question how much of the past is truly knowable. Ancient civilizations that suddenly vanished without trace remind us that absence is as much a part of history as presence. They show us that human achievement, no matter how great, can dissolve into silence faster than we wish to believe. Psychologically, these vanishings confront our fear of impermanence. We build towers of steel, carve networks of glass and silicon, confident in our permanence. Yet the ruins remind us that others once felt the same. The Maya gazed at their pyramids and believed them eternal. The Indus people walked their gridded streets with the same certainty. The citizens of Teotihuacan marched down the avenue of the dead, unaware it would one day be empty. Their vanishings unsettle because they mirror us. We too could vanish, our traces left to be puzzled over by strangers centuries hence. And yet, within these mysteries lies another truth. Civilizations never vanish completely. The Maya still live, though their cities fell. The descendants of the Indus Valley farmers walk the lands of Pakistan and India. Angkor's Khmer legacy echoes in Cambodia. Disappearance is never absolute, it is transformation. What we call vanishing may be survival in another form, misunderstood because we crave neat narratives. Still, the cliff edge remains. When we ask why civilizations vanish, we are really asking if ours might too. Could climate change, war, or disease render us as silent as Ugarit, as buried as Petra, as forgotten as the Hittites? History whispers that the answer is yes. The forces that erase them, rivers, hunger, conquest, silence, still exist, sharpening their knives in the shadows of our present. But perhaps the greatest mystery is why we cannot let them go. We dig, we decipher, we imagine, because their silence taunts us. The ruins do not only tell of the past, they accuse us. They say, you too believe you are eternal. You too build monuments and systems and stories. But eternity is fragile. If we vanish, what will remain of us? A skyline half buried, a server farm rusting in desert wind, a myth whispered by those who come after. The civilizations that suddenly vanished without trace live on not through certainty, but through mystery. Their silence is their survival, because as long as we search, as long as we wonder, they remain part of us. And in that haunting presence, they leave us with a final question that lingers like a shadow. If they could vanish, what makes us believe we cannot?